What the hell is the Prime Minister going on about?
I will start with an apology on behalf of the British to each and every one of you.
He's a coward! He's a coward!
Get out of my pub! Go on! Calm yourself down. Get out of my pub!
In London, I think that was a question well worth asking, which is a question...
He has in fact been two-tier Keir all along.
Prime Minister, from tomorrow, new sentencing guidelines will discriminate against white men before judges. What are you going to do about it?
A growing number. Last number I know, 133 Labour MPs demanding that the Prime Minister recognises...
I implore members opposite to park the opportunism. I know the Honourable Member for Stretford-Nerveston thinks this is a good crisis which the Labour Party should exploit. And I know she speaks for a lot of her frontbench colleagues with that. You just need to see it in the support, U-turn, oppose approach that's characterised that high-heavy behaviour. But, excuse me, did the Honourable Lady Scum?
Order! 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 Order!
We want our countrymen! We want our countrymen!
1 minute ago, chaos exploded outside Downing Street as Keir Starmer stepped out expecting applause, but instead a wall of deafening boos hit him like a shockwave. Cameras caught every second as the crowd turned hostile, the tension cutting through the air. What began as a routine statement spiralled into a brutal public humiliation, a showdown so fierce that even his own aides froze. And when a reporter confronted him live on air with a question he desperately didn't want to answer, Starmer's entire image cracked right in front of millions. This wasn't pressure, this was collapse. And it happened live. Stay locked in, because what unfolded next has already shaken the political world to its core. The moment Keir Starmer appeared at the back door of Downing Street, something felt wrong. Instantly, unmistakably wrong. Instead of the controlled atmosphere he always tries to build, the setting erupted with noise. At first, it was muffled. Then it grew louder. And within seconds, it became a roar so sharp, so unforgiving, that even the broadcasters paused mid-sentence. The boos rose like a tidal wave, rolling over him, drowning out every attempt he made to begin speaking. Starmer froze. Eyes widening just slightly, but enough for the cameras to capture his discomfort. That single flicker of doubt was all the crowd needed. The energy shifted, the atmosphere hardened, and whatever control Starmer thought he had evaporated in an instant. Aides tried to maintain composure, but their nervous glances betrayed the truth. This was no ordinary protest. It wasn't organised chants or slogans. It was raw rejection, unfiltered anger, a reaction that hit him without warning and without mercy. 1 minute ago, Starmer walked out expecting dominance. Now he stood facing a backlash he couldn't silence. Reporters, sensing blood in the water, leaned forward, preparing for what was clearly turning into a political disaster. The sound of jeers echoed off the stone buildings, rattling the space around him. Every time he opened his mouth, the boos surged again, louder than before, as if the crowd refused to let him speak. Starmer's frustration began to show. His jaw tightened. His fingers gripped the podium too firmly, knuckles paling as he tried to force authority where none remained. But the harder he pushed, the more the moment slipped away. He raised his voice, trying to shout over the chaos, but the microphones picked up every harsh tone, every crack, every sign of a leader who suddenly looked powerless. Journalists exchanged looks, sensing the unravelling. This wasn't a simple interruption. This was a public rejection unfolding on live television in a setting he believed he controlled. And then came the first blow on live TV. A reporter from a major network stepped forward and delivered the question that shattered any hope of recovery. Prime Minister, is the public reaction today a sign that you have lost the confidence of the nation? The words cut through the noise like a blade. Even the crowd fell briefly silent, waiting for his answer. Starmer blinked, caught off guard, visibly rattled. He attempted a smile, thin, forced, unconvincing. The kind of smile someone uses to hide panic, but fails. The cameras zoomed in, catching the tightness around his eyes, the tension in every muscle. This was a leader under fire, stripped of his usual calm. As he tried to speak, the silence didn't last. The crowd erupted again, faster, louder, more brutal than before. The jeers drowned out his first sentence. He tried again. Another wave hit. The humiliation was complete. Every attempt to regain control only deepened the chaos. He looked left to his team, searching for direction, but they stood frozen, realising what millions at home were seeing. A Prime Minister cornered, exposed and unable to command the moment. Starmer's voice broke slightly as he attempted to push through, but the microphones captured it with painful clarity. That crack was enough. Social media began exploding within seconds, commentators calling it one of the most embarrassing Downing Street moments in years. What made it worse was the mood of the crowd. This wasn't simply anger. This was disappointment, mixed with fury, a sense that promises had been broken, trust shattered. Their reactions weren't coordinated. They were instinctive, genuine. And each shout carried the message Starmer desperately tried to avoid. The country was slipping out of his grasp. Reporters captured every second, broadcasting the spectacle live, unedited, unfiltered. Downing Street, normally a symbol of control and authority, had transformed into a battlefield, and Starmer was standing alone at the centre. When he finally managed to speak more than a few words, it wasn't strength that came through. It was tension, it was fear. It was the unmistakable sound of a leader realising the moment had turned against him and turned hard. The boos continued relentless, as if refusing to give him even a second of dignity. His speech fell apart, his talking points scattered. And the nation watched, stunned, as the Prime Minister faced a brutal, unprecedented public shaming right on his own doorstep. The tension outside Downing Street tightened like a rope around the moment, pulling everything into a breaking point. Seconds after Starmer's failed attempt to speak, another confrontation erupted, this time even closer, even sharper. A second reporter, clearly emboldened by the chaos, raised her voice above the noise and delivered a question that sliced straight through the air. Prime Minister, why is the public turning against you so fast? What exactly have you lost control of? The words weren't just a challenge, they were an accusation, and they hit him harder than the boos. Starmer's face shifted, the calm political mask slipping for a fraction of a second. That tiny moment was all the cameras needed. Every outlet zoomed in, capturing the press the instant. The pressure cracked his composure. He tried to steady himself, but the crowd sensed weakness and surged again. The boos rolled forward like a wave, mixing with shouts and anger. People demanded answers, demanded accountability, demanded something he couldn't give in that moment. The sound was overwhelming, pounding against the podium, bouncing off the historical walls of Downing Street, turning the entire space into a chamber of fury. Starmer attempted to raise his voice again, but it came out strained. His words swallowed by noise and distrust. What was supposed to be a controlled statement now looked like a leader fighting against the collapse of his own authority. The police officers standing nearby stiffened as the crowd pushed forward. Not violently, but with a force of emotion that felt impossible to contain. Journalists exchanged looks of disbelief. This wasn't planned, this wasn't expected. This was a breaking point. A moment where the public's frustration, simmering for months, finally erupted. And the worst part, it was all happening live, broadcast across every major network, every social platform, every screen in the country. Millions were witnessing something rare. A Prime Minister losing the room, the street, and the moment all at once. Starmer leaned closer to the microphone, desperate to regain ground, but desperation only made it worse. His voice trembled slightly, barely noticeable, but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. The crowd roared again, almost as if responding to that tremor, drawn to the vulnerability like fuel to fire. A chant began to form, not loud at first, but enough to send a shock through the atmosphere. The rhythm grew, spreading from one side of the gathering to the other, until the entire crowd seemed to pulse with it. Starmer heard it, his team heard it, the country heard it, and in that moment, the chant became the soundtrack of his downfall. He paused, closed his eyes for half a second, trying to gather himself. But when he opened them, he found more cameras pointed at him than ever before. Every angle captured the sweat beginning to gather at his temple, the stiffness in his posture, the shaking breath he was trying to disguise. This was not the controlled, polished figure he presented in interviews. This was a man cornered by his own nation's reaction, struggling to find footing while the ground crumbled beneath him. His attempt to restart his speech fell apart immediately as another burst of boos drowned him out. It wasn't just disrespect, it was a complete rejection. Someone in the crowd shouted his name, followed by a harsh accusation, and the moment hit like a slap. Starmer looked visibly shaken, his hand tightening on the podium again. The cameras caught every detail, the twitch of his jaw, the forced swallow, the rising panic in his eyes. His aides, standing slightly behind him, exchanged worried whispers. They knew what was happening. They knew this couldn't be spun, controlled, or reframed. This was raw footage that would define him for the next decade. No political advisor could fix the damage being inflicted on live television. Another reporter stepped forward, this time with open aggression. Prime Minister, is this the breaking point of your leadership? The country deserves clarity. Her voice cut straight through the noise. Starmer tried to answer, but the crowd refused to let him speak. Every attempt he made was drowned out, twisted into humiliation, turned into proof of his weakening grip on power. He looked left, then right, as if searching for an escape route, but there was none. The moment had locked him in, sealed him inside the confrontation. He could not win. The pressure became visible. Starmer's shoot. What happened next pushed the entire situation from chaos into something far more dangerous, something that felt like a political earthquake unfolding in real time. As the chanting roared louder, Starmer tried again to steady himself, raising a trembling hand in an attempt to signal for calm. But the gesture only intensified the fury. The crowd interpreted it not as leadership, but as arrogance. A failed attempt to silence the people who had already made up their minds. The jeers hit him again, stronger, sharper, vibrating through the air like a warning he could no longer ignore. His voice cracked as he attempted to speak, and that single crack acted like fuel on a fire that was already burning out of control. A male reporter from the centre row leaned forward aggressively, his voice piercing through the noise. Prime Minister, can you explain why the public feels betrayed? Why your promises are collapsing right in front of us? The question echoed across the scene, amplified by the silent anticipation that followed it. For the first time that afternoon, Starmer didn't immediately respond. His lips parted, but no words came out. He stared at the reporter for a moment too long, and that hesitation, small as it was, landed like a bomb. Commentators watching live began whispering into their earpieces. Camera operators zoomed in. Everyone sensed the shift. That hesitation was the moment millions at home gasped. It was the moment analysts would replay again and again. It was the moment Starmer's confidence shattered into something fragile and exposed. He finally managed to force out a sentence, but his voice sounded hollow, strained, disconnected from the authority he usually carried. We are listening to the public, he said, but even that simple line was swallowed instantly by another wave of unforgiving boos, proving that no one believed a single word coming out of his mouth. A woman near the front of the crowd shouted, "Then why aren't you answering us?" Her voice, raw with frustration, cut straight through every barrier surrounding him. Starmer turned toward her instinctively, but he quickly looked away because the moment his eyes met the crowd, he saw something he had never seen before, not anger alone, but disappointment. Disappointment is always more dangerous, more permanent, and more politically deadly. It carries weight, memory, and a sting that lasts far beyond any headline. And this disappointment wasn't isolated, it was collective. Starmer's team took a small step forward, as if preparing to intervene, but they didn't dare touch him. Not yet. The cameras were everywhere. Any sign of panic from his staff would turn a crisis into a global humiliation. So they stood still, rigid, trapped between duty and disaster. The tension in their faces told the whole story. They knew this moment would follow him for the rest of his political life. The damage had already been broadcast. The humiliation had already sunk in. The narrative had already begun writing itself without a single advisor controlling it. The chants from the crowd began to change again. This time, they weren't just calling his name. They were demanding one thing, one word, one outcome. It grew slowly at first, starting from the left side of the barrier, rolling forward, picking up momentum until it became the only sound that filled the space. Resign! 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 The word hit him like a physical blow. His eyes widened, not dramatically, but enough that every viewer could see the shock sink into his expression. That chant, Echoing through the heart of Downing Street was unlike anything witnessed in years. It wasn't just public anger, it was public judgment. Starmer tried again to speak, leaning into the microphone, but the chant overpowered him instantly. His voice disappeared under its weight. The more he tried to assert authority, the more the moment swallowed him whole. He looked trapped, cornered, overwhelmed. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but the microphones picked up nothing but fragments, pieces of broken sentences that collapsed before they could form meaning. Every attempt he made became another symbol of how far he was falling. Another reporter stepped forward, this one calm, but with a cold sharpness that made the moment even more brutal. "Prime Minister," he said slowly, as if choosing each word with surgical precision, "how can you lead a country that no longer listens to you? What authority do you still have?" The question landed like a strike to the core, and for a long moment, Starmer didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. He had no words, no explanation, no escape. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. The crowd watched him. The cameras stared at him. The country waited. And in that silent, crushing moment, the reality became clear. This wasn't a bad press moment. This wasn't a difficult crowd. This was the leader losing his grip in front of an entire nation. A downfall unfolding faster than he could react. He tried one last time to push out a statement, but his voice trembled again, exposing the panic he was desperately trying to bury. The microphones caught every ounce of that fear, and the crowd, sensing the weakness, erupted in another wave of chants that shook the entire street. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, standing outside the most powerful office in the country, had become the centre of a public revolt he could no longer control. As the chants shook Downing Street, something shifted. Not in the crowd, not in the reporters, but in Starmer himself. His posture changed, his shoulders tensed, then dropped. His eyes darted from side to side as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. The once confident leader, who always tried to appear unshakable, suddenly looked smaller, almost swallowed by the moment surrounding him. Cameras caught every second, broadcasting the unravelling of a Prime Minister who had walked out expecting control and instead found himself standing in the centre of a storm he could not weather. The humiliation was no longer public, it was personal, and it was spreading like fire. A senior aide, usually calm and composed, stepped forward slightly, whispering something urgently into Starmer's ear. The microphones couldn't pick up the words, but his expression revealed the message clearly. Retreat! Step back, end this before it destroys everything. But Starmer shook his head, a stubborn refusal clinging to the last piece of authority he believed he still had. He tried once more to raise his voice above the crowd, but the attempt fell apart instantly. His throat tightened, the words collapsing before they reached the microphone. The boos grew harsher, almost mocking him now, as if the crowd sensed he was pushing against something impossible to overcome. Reporters saw the opening and moved in. One shouted a question about his leadership, another demanded a response on his collapsing support. A third confronted him with the latest poll numbers flashing across the screens. Inside newsrooms, every question was another blow, another reminder that the moment had moved far beyond his control. Starmer lifted both hands slightly, trying to regain order, but the gesture only produced another round of furious shouting. His face flushed with frustration, and for a moment he looked like he was about to snap. His jaw tight, his chest rising in quick, uneven breaths. And then came the moment that changed everything. Starmer stepped back from the podium. It was small, barely a single step, but symbolically, it was enormous. The crowd instantly reacted, erupting into an even louder roar. The reporters leaned in closer. That step, captured on dozens of cameras from every angle, would become the image repeated across every network. A Prime Minister stepping back. Not out of humility, but out of defeat. The moment he physically retreated from his own press conference became the headline before anyone even wrote it. His aides saw it and panicked. Not visibly, but in their eyes, the fear was unmistakable. They exchanged rapid glances, realising the damage was now impossible to contain. They had to pull him out. They had to end this before it spiralled into something even more catastrophic. But Starmer, driven by a mix of pride and desperation, stepped forward again, trying to reclaim the position he had just abandoned. It was too late. The crowd pounced. The boos turned into a deafening wall of noise that practically swallowed him